Entity relationship diagrams are typically used to document the data structures within an organization and how they interconnect with each other. These data models are frequently used to inform the design of databases. PlantUML provides two types of diagrams which we can use to capture our data elements. For the conceptual stage, where you're defining a broad overview of what will be included in the data model, we can create entity relationship diagrams with Chen's notation. Once we're at the point where we want to document the logical and physical design, you can use information engineering diagrams, which I'll be demonstrating in this video. Using a diagram as code approach for entity relationship diagrams has a number of benefits. It's easier to version control our diagrams. The advantages of this is it helps make sure that everyone is using the same version. Updates can be simpler to perform. For example, it's easier to search and replace in text than in a visual diagram. And the syntax rules help us to be consistent and more accurate when creating diagrams. I'm going to write the code that will create the diagram using the PlantText online editor, as it means there's no need to install any software in the desktop, which can be difficult in some scenarios. You could just as easily use PlantUML's online editor, but I prefer PlantText. I'll include a link to it in the description. So we'll get started with the start and end markers. Next, I'm going to add some formatting. The left to right direction instructs PlantUML to place our entities horizontally, which will make our diagram a little easier to read. I'm going to create a very simple diagram showing the entities and relationships for an online ordering system. The first entity I'm going to create is for customers. Start with the keyword entity, then the entity name, I'm using the as to set an alias for the entity of E1. This will be convenient when it comes to setting up the relationships between the entities, as I won't need to type out the full names again. Within the brackets, we define our attributes or fields. So I'm going to start with the customer ID, and I'm going to say that's our primary key. I'm going to separate the key field from the other fields or attributes so it's a bit easier to read and hopefully bring some more clarity to the design later on. Now I'm going to set up attributes for the name of our customer, an email address so we can contact them about their order, contact number in case we need to speak to them, and an address so we have somewhere to send their completed order to. Now I've prefixed some of the fields with a star. This is to show that they are mandatory, they can't hold nulls. I've also defined the data types for each field. This isn't mandatory, but I think it's useful information to include on our diagram. So we've created our first entity for customer. I'm going to create our second entity now for the order. Again, we start with the entity keyword and then the entity name. Set the alias. Then I'm going to put in an order ID number. There's an integer, and again, this will be the primary key. So we can determine which order it relates to. I'm going to put in the customer ID as a foreign key. And then finally, I think we'll have an order date. And that's our second entity setup. Now, our order is going to be composed of multiple lines, so we're going to have an order line entity next. So, keyword entity name. And this one's going to have a composite key. And we just have a quantity, I think, as well. So that's our third entity setup, and a final one for the products. I have an ID number. And that would be our primary key. And we'll just have a product description. And there we have it. We have 4 entities. So now we need to set up the relationships between them. When it comes to documenting the cardinality and ordinality relationships between entities, PlantUML provides 4 options: 0, 1, exactly 1, 0 or many, 1 or many. The symbols for relationship that PlantUML creates in our diagram uses the standard notation, but the syntax to define them in our code is a little bit odd. In this table, I've put the relationships supported by PlantUML, their symbols, and the syntax. The PlantUML website contains the complete syntax for the diagram, a link to which I'll include in this video's description. So now I add the relationships to the diagram. I'm going to use the aliases that I specified when I created the entities. A customer can place 0 or many orders, and an order can only be placed by one customer. So that's the first relationship in the diagram. An order can have one or many order item lines, and a line can only be part of one order. And finally, a product can be in many or 0 orders. And that finishes off this simple diagram. It's a shame that PlantUML doesn't allow us to label the relationships in the diagram. Maybe that's something they'll add in a future release.